My name is Margaret Evans, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Dallas, Texas. For most of my life, I believed that our family was ordinary, loving, imperfect in its own ways, but still bound by trust. I had been married to Robert for nearly 25 years, and together we raised our son Daniel, who had just turned 22. Daniel was smart, ambitious, and had always been the kind of young man who made me proud. But what happened one summer evening shook me to my core and forced me to look at our family from a completely different perspective. It began like any other day. Robert left early for work at his construction firm, while I stayed behind, working remotely as a freelance writer. Daniel had been home from college for the summer, spending his days juggling a part-time job and hanging out with his friends. On this particular day, however, I noticed something unusual. He left the house in the morning but returned only an hour later, quietly slipping into his room. As a mother, I knew his patterns. Daniel was usually talkative, but he didn't greet me this time. I thought maybe he was just tired. Hours passed, and when I walked down the hall to bring him some lunch, I overheard muffled voices coming from his room. At first, I thought he was on the phone. But when I leaned closer, I realized the tone of his voice was different, hesitant, almost guilty. I knocked softly and asked, "Daniel, are you okay?" He responded quickly, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just busy." The shortness in his reply made me uneasy, but I respected his space. Later that evening, Robert and I sat down for dinner. Daniel said he wasn't hungry and stayed in his room. My husband brushed it off, saying, "He's just growing up, Margaret. Give him some privacy." But my instincts told me something else was going on. The following day, everything unraveled. I was folding laundry when I realized Daniel had left his room light on and the door slightly ajar. I stepped inside to place his clean clothes on the bed. That's when I noticed his laptop open on the desk. The screen showed a paused video call, and in the corner, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Daniel wasn't alone in this situation. He had been talking to someone's wife. The evidence was undeniable, and the messages on the screen revealed a truth I never expected. Daniel was secretly involved with a married woman. I froze. My son, my bright, respectful Daniel, was caught in an act of betrayal that went against everything I had raised him to believe. When Daniel walked into the room and saw me standing there, his face turned pale. "Mom, what are you doing?" he stammered. I looked at him, my hands trembling. "Daniel, what is this? Who is she?" He slumped into his chair, covering his face. After a long silence, he whispered, "Her name is Claire. She's older, she's married. But, Mom, she understands me in ways no one else does." My heart ached hearing those words. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, but instead, I sat beside him. "Daniel, this isn't love. This is dangerous, for her, for you, and for her family." Tears welled up in his eyes as he explained how it started. Claire was a customer at the coffee shop where he worked. She had been kind to him, listened to his struggles, and eventually confessed that her marriage was falling apart. Daniel, craving connection, found himself drawn in. One thing led to another, and soon, he was entangled in a relationship that should never have existed. I reminded him of the values we had always taught: honesty, integrity, and respect for others. "Daniel, someone else's broken marriage is not yours to fix. You're too young to be carrying someone else's burden like this. And most importantly, you cannot build happiness on someone else's pain." The days that followed were heavy. Robert eventually found out when I told him the truth. He was furious at first, raising his voice, demanding how Daniel could do such a thing. But beneath his anger was also worry. We didn't want our son's future destroyed by one bad choice. Together, we sat Daniel down and gave him an ultimatum: end this relationship immediately, or risk losing not only his family's trust but also his own peace of mind. It wasn't easy. Claire kept reaching out, trying to pull him back in. But with our support, Daniel slowly broke away. It took months for him to recover from the emotional mess. He went back to college with a renewed focus, channeling his energy into his studies and friendships. Occasionally, I would still see the shadow of guilt in his eyes, but I reminded him that mistakes don't define us. What matters is how we choose to rise after falling. Looking back, I realized that moment, catching my son in the act, was both painful and necessary. It forced Daniel to confront his choices, and it reminded our family of the importance of open communication. We had to rebuild trust, but in the end, we grew stronger. Today, Daniel is on his way to becoming a lawyer, using his experiences as a reminder of why integrity matters. He has sworn never to repeat that mistake again. And I, as his mother, have learned that sometimes the hardest lessons come when we least expect them. So, if you're listening to this story, take it as a warning and as hope. No matter how badly you stumble, there is always a way to turn back. Infidelity, secrecy, and lies may bring temporary comfort, but they will never bring true happiness. What lasts is honesty, accountability, and love that doesn't come at the expense of others. And that is the story of the night I caught my son in the act, and how it changed all of our lives forever.